Good evening. This evening we're going to discuss what is called scientific classification or biological classification, or sometimes called taxonomy. Classification means that the multitude, the myriad of life forms that God has created in our world obviously possess similarities one to the other. And there are closer similarities and further similarities. And based upon the different similarities, there are different levels of or orders, and though the word order is actually one of them, of generalities or of families, of putting things into families and classifying in order simply to make sense of all of the tremendous variety of creatures that Hashem has created and given us in our world. But this is a science in and of itself. It's called taxonomy, or it's called scientific classification. Just as any other science or intellectual investigation, it must have its origin in the Torah, since it has to do with creation. So we would expect that the real origin is in the very first part of the Torah, which is the account of creation, the story of creation. And we will, as we'll see, we will find it there in the story of creation itself. But before we turn to the story of creation and see how the species and all of the other levels of scientific classification are found to be found. So first we'll treat the philosophic understanding of the ancients and of the Jewish philosophers, like Maimonides and Rabbeinu Tzaddik that preceded Maimonides, how they related to the terms, the terms of classification and the meaning of classification. So the two basic words philosophically are called min and sug. Actually, what I'm holding in my hands right here is the Sefer Emunot V'Deot, which is the first philosophic work in Jewish literature, the philosophic work of Rabbeinu Tzaddik. And as an introduction to this work, even Tibon, who also translated the Moreh Nevuchim of Shmuel, actually, his son, the Moreh Nevuchim of the Rambam, the Ibn Tivon family, they were the great translators of all of the philosophic works of Judaism in the medieval times. There's a very, very lengthy introduction that he introduces and defines all of the basic words and concepts that are used throughout all of Jewish philosophy. And obviously many of them are Hebrew renditions of terms that also appear in the Greek philosophy. But obviously, as soon as it's given a Hebrew term and a Hebrew word for it, it already gives rise and birth to much greater depth and many, many more dimensions of understanding and meaning. Now, very significantly, the very first pair of concepts, usually concepts goes in pairs or sets of concepts. You have to understand them one in relation to the other. The very first of this whole long introduction of hundreds of different philosophical concepts that a person has to know before he opens up one of the philosophical texts of Judaism. Once more, beginning from Emunot V'Deot of Rabbeinu Tzaddik and then the Moreh Nevuchim of the Rambam and so forth. The very first thing that you have to know and understand philosophically is classification. And classification is based simply on two words. That the two words are min, which will translate as species, or a certain kind. Actually, the word means a kind. We'll explain much more what that word means. The Panan words. And the other word which goes together with mean is sug. The sug in English would usually translate as a category. Now, minim are always under sugim. But what I'm holding now in my hand is this book, and the very first thing as we see here is called hasug v'amin. The first thing that you have to understand is how to classify things into sugim, categories, and minim, and species. The simplest example that he gives is that the greatest sug, the greatest category is, say, plants, tzomea. And within that category of plants, you have trees, but you also have grass. But then trees is also a category, because there are many different types of trees. So within the trees, you have olive trees, and you have palm trees, and you have all kinds of other trees. So he says that what a person has to understand is that when you speak about classification, you must have in mind two relative states, which are always changing, because it's all relative. So actually, this very first philosophical concept is a concept of relativity. That in relation to lower distinctions and classification, so the higher one is called a sug, a category. But in relation to that which is above it, which means that it's more generic, it's more general than that which is below, so the lower one is called a min. Once more, in relation to the vegetable kingdom, trees are a min, and the kingdom is the sug. But in relation to specific trees, so trees, the concept trees, ilanot, is a sug. And each one of the different types of trees is a min. Now, we'll go on to quote later on that Chazal themselves say that palm trees, there are 70 different species of palm trees. And this is a verse, actually, it's based upon a verse in the Torah itself. If you open up a modern encyclopedia or a biology text, so you'll find that there are 2,600 different species of palm trees. Now, obviously, this is an example of expanse. But usually, the lowest biological level is the species. And it's usually commonly defined that it's those different living beings that reproduce with one another. They belong to the same species. But there are also subspecies, for instance, in the zoology. So the species is lupus, which is the wolf. And the dog, the common dog, that maybe we'll talk about more in the continuation, is simply, it's referred to as a subspecies. It's called the domestic wolf. So things, even though the modern method of biological classification divides all of reality into 8 or 9 different levels, we'll go on to explain in how they correspond to the Sfirot. Obviously, that's the first model that we want to construct. But there are a multitude of more levels that can be added in between, even at the very, very end. So even though in general one thinks of a species to be the final level, but no, there's also subspecies. And within dogs, obviously, there are millions, and maybe millions is an exaggeration, but many, many, many different types of dogs. In fact, in one scientific article it says that just how many dogs are there in the world? There are 400 million dogs on the face of the earth right now. Which means that there are more human beings than dogs, but dogs is coming close to the number of human beings. There are 400 million dogs. In any event, of those 400 million dogs, there are many, many different kinds. There are thousands and thousands of different kinds of dogs. And the dog itself is simply a subspecies of wolves. And so on and so on, so on and so forth. Right, so once more, the very first thing that he says here is that theoretically or philosophically, the two concepts, sug versus min, have to be understood. there's a final level that it's only a mean, and there's nothing below it. So it's only a mean, and it's not a sug. What could be below that concept mean, which is a species, are the individual human beings or the individual lions. Each individual in its own right, that obviously in our world they are born and they die. It said that Hashem created things that in the eye of Hashem and in the will, dependent upon the will of Hashem, of God, every species can remain forever because it reproduces. That in itself is a rationale to explain that the definition of species should possess the concept of reproduction. Or even to make it more exact, the way it's defined in the books, fertile reproduction. It's not like a donkey and a horse that produce a mule, and a mule can no longer reproduce. So that's not called the horse and the donkey are not the same species, because even though they can reproduce, but what they give birth to is not fertile, cannot continue to reproduce itself. In the Kabbalah and Chassidut, that's called koach and sof. It means that the most basic understanding of a species is fertile reproduction, and under that is only the concept of ish. So here we're not, in this particular piece of this philosophic understanding, there's min and sug. It's not talking about the individuals. It's talking about the sometimes it's even referred to as the species as a philosophic idea. It's an ideal or an idea. But in and of itself, there's a multitude of levels that each one in relation to that which is below is a sug, and each one in relation to that which is above it is a min. That's what's understood here. Now, before we now turn on to the next bit of information and understanding, let's just note a very beautiful phenomenon. We said as soon as you take terms and see that the terms are Hebrew words, and every Hebrew word has infinite meaning behind it. And one of the levels of meaning of every word is also reflected by its numerical value in the Hebrew, according to the value of the Hebrew letters. The word mean, which is the species word, which is under the word sug, the more general category. So that word equals exactly 100, which is obviously a very perfect number because it's 10 squared, 10 facets to reality, 10 sfirot, and so forth and so on. 10 times 10 is mean, so that's a very important gematria. Now, if you just add an aleph to that word mean, then it becomes me'ayin, which is equals 101 now instead of 100. But the word me'ayin, by adding the aleph to the mean, so it gives it a whole different meaning, a sense to it. Because now it means from nothing. When we speak of creation being ex nihilo, which is the most important challenge of modern science, to understand ex nihilo versus what appears to be evolution. So the very word mean alludes to me'ayin, just missing an aleph. Just like the Rebbe explains that the redemption is just missing an aleph, because without the aleph it's gula, which is the exile. And if you add the aleph, it becomes gula, which is redemption. So the very same phenomenon is true of species and from nothing. It's ex nihilo. The very word mean just is missing an aleph to become ex nihilo. Now, actually, before we said that under the mean itself, the species are the individual creatures that live and die, which are called ish. Each individual is called an ish. Actually, those two words together, ish and mean, each word has 3 letters. They permute to spell the full phrase yesh me'ayin, which is also a very, very beautiful and amazing phenomenon. The mean, which due to fertile reproduction is unlimited in the extent of its ability to exist on earth, and the ish, the individual which lives and dies, So, to understand the relation of those two together, ish and min, it's simply a permutation of something from nothing. But the very word min itself is just missing the aleph in order to read the ayah. Right, so the observation was that min is 100, which is perfect, but still it's missing something. It's missing that additional one. What about sug? Above every min, so there's a sug, a category, a more general category. We'll call it a genus. Above every species there's a genus. But these two words, as we'll see, are the two best choices for what now in biology are called species and genus. Even though it's relative, I mean, the genus is a species relative to a family. And a family is a species relative to an order. And the order is a species relative to a class. And a class is a species relative to a phylum. And a phylum is a species relative to a kingdom. And then as you go down, each one is also a sug relative to the one below it. But still, what makes most sense is if we have to choose words, is to choose the word min for what in biology is called the species, and choose the word sug for what in biology is called the genus. Now what about the numerical value of sug? Sug is 69. "69 is not a square number, but very, very amazingly, when you add the 69, the sug to the min is 100. And then you add 69 to 100, becomes 169. It's once more a square number. It's a square number of the most important number, of 13. So actually, by adding this concept of sug to min from 10 squared, we reach now 13 squared. Let's go on to examine and contemplate the letters. Just the initial letters themselves of sug and min, or samech and mem, which are 60 and 40, which once more equal 100. It means that the initial letters of the two words themselves equal min. Meaning, obviously, that the additional letters, which are the middle and the final letters, will equal sug, 69, because just the two first letters equal 100, so the other letters must then equal 69. But instead of spelling now sug, the other letters spell either yagon, which is agony, or they spell Jung. Jung is now equals sug, which are the other letters after samach mem, and he's the one that talked about collective subconsciousness. So obviously, if we're now going to identify sug with the genus, it means that all those creatures that are of the same genus have some collective subconscious to them. They might not yet be able to reproduce, fertile reproduction, that's only the species. But they have Jungian psychology above them, the sug, the genus. And maybe above the genus, which is the family, maybe to a certain extent that subconscious obviously goes deeper and deeper into the unconscious and becomes less reflected in the behavior of those creatures. But certainly at the level of genus, there's still to a certain extent a collective subconscious which is manifest and reflected in the behavior of the different creatures that belong to the same genus. Okay, so now with this introduction, we just before mentioned the normal taxonomy, which are the biological classifications. That the lowest one, which is the one that reproduces fertily, is the min, and that's what the Torah also refers to when it uses the word min in the story of creation that we'll go on to examine. And the one above that, which is the genus, is the sug. And since here this first philosophic principle is that you just have to understand the relative nature of sug and min, it seems to be implying what also scientists say, that you have to have some binomial expression for every creature, which is to state its genus, which is its sug, together with its mean, and that's sufficient to define a given creature. So that's exactly this sug-mean relationship. Right, so what's above the genus? Above the genus is called the family. Now, in certain texts, they add another level between the genus and the family called the tribe. But most often, it's just from genus to family. What's above the family is the order. Like all carnivorous mammals are of the same order. Above the order is the class. All mammals are of the same class. Above the class is the phylum. And above the phylum is the kingdom. And above the kingdom is the domain, which is a relatively new level of classification. It's more hidden, as we'll explain. A domain contains different kingdoms, like the animal kingdom and the vegetable kingdom belong to the same domain. But there are other domains, because there's molecular living organisms, bacteria, and other forms of molecular life forms, which do not belong, which are neither vegetable nor animal. So they belong to a different domain. And nowadays, in most modern science, there are either three or four different domains, one of which is both animals and vegetables together. Meaning the domain is a sug, which is above the kingdom, like the animal kingdom by itself and the vegetable kingdom by itself. Meaning that up until recently, you could either be a zoologist or a botanist. And it's you thought that it was totally two different kingdoms, but now there's the botanists and the zoologists have to meet and come together under the one common domain. Means that there's sometimes the domain is called an empire, which is higher even than a kingdom, because an empire contains many kings to it. Now, in the books, it says that above the empire is life, because we're only now contemplating living organisms. So, what is the normal division? Normal division from bottom up is first species, mean, and then sug, which is genus, and then above that is family. Now, family in Hebrew, let's give each one a Hebrew word. Family in Hebrew is mishpacha, which is a very good word, that things are classified into mishpachot, into families. We'll try to find a word which is closest to the secular word that was given to these levels of classification. And above that is an order. Above the family is an order. Obviously, if there would be a tribe in between there, so the tribe also has a very simple name in Hebrew, which is Shevet. It's interesting that the way that the biologists classify, they put a tribe below the family. The family is higher. A family has many tribes to it. Which we would think, also in the Torah, we think the very opposite. That the tribe has many families to it. But they place the tribe in between the genus and the family. But we can leave out the tribe for the time being, because in general it's also left out. It's a subdivision. There are many subdivisions. So we have a family. That the Hebrew word for a family is obviously mishpacha. Then above the family we have an order. Now, order also has a simple Hebrew word to it, but even in English, the word order can mean two things. It can mean either order like what comes first and what comes second. It can mean an order which is a classification, an order of things. Obviously, there's a relation between the two meanings of order. So in Hebrew also, you have the same relation, because the word order, which means to put things in order one after the other, is seder. But Seder, order, also implies that you have many things on the table, like the Seder Shel Pesach. There are many, many things, many components and entities in the Seder. Because there's not, the Seder implies that there isn't in a certain sense, a linear order to it. But it also implies that you have many, many different components that they all belong to the same Seder. So we can adopt the word Seder, which is the literal translation of the word order. Now, since Seder implies not just a order of things, which is a large category of similar things, like for instance in mammals, the order is carnivorous. A carnivorous mammal is the order level. And just to be a mammal is a class level, which is above that. So order is not just all of the things which are similar in this respect, but it also has a momentum to it. It has an order to it. And as we'll see, the concept of order, if we just make a very simple one-to-one corresponds to the sfirot, it's going to come out to be Tiferet, the order. And the word for Tiferet in the Torah is Yashar. It means a straight, orderly line of descent. But it also, Tiferet implies it has many, many different hues and colors to it, because Tiferet means beauty, means that it has many, many things under it. But it also has a certain direction to it, so it fits very, very well into the word Seder, which is the literal translation of order. Then above order is a class. A class in Hebrew would be kvutza. Above class is phylum. Now phylum is under kingdom. So what we suggest for the word phylum is ummah, because ummah is a nation. And that makes sense that the nation should be under the kingdom, which is the mamlacha. But then there's a domain, which is an empire, which is even more than a kingdom. But for kingdom, we're not going to use the word malchut, we'll use the word mamlacha, is a king. But we know that there are kings of kings. HaKadosh Baruch Hu himself, Hashem is called Melech Malchei Amlachim, is the king of the kings of the kings. So the Torah also says that there are kingdoms and that there are super kingdoms, which are empires. So if for the kingdom we use the word mamlacha, so for the super kingdom or for the empire, that would be the proper place to use the word malchut, which is malchutcha, malchut kolamim. Your super kingdom is the kingdom of all worlds. But all of this is under the keter, the crown, which is life. In Torah and Kabbalah, life is ta'anug, is pleasure, the pleasure principle. And pleasure is the inner dimension, the inner reality and experience of the crown. So life is the ta'anug of the crown. Ki macham mekor chayim, with you is the origin of life, which is the origin of all pleasure. That's the way it's explained in Kabbalah and Chassidut. Then under that come two very, very general categories, one more general than the other, which is Malchut and Mamlacha, which will then correspond to Chokhmah and Binah. Under that comes from phylum down are the seven attributes of the heart. But kingdom, what is called kingdom, like the vegetable kingdom versus the animal kingdom, that's at the mother level. What's even above that, which is the domain, which means that, once more, the simple example that the domain means that the animal kingdom and the vegetable kingdom are one domain, the same domain. So that's obviously that's the father principle, which unites the two great kingdoms of the animal world and the vegetable world. Once more, echad achdut, the power to unite two great kingdoms of reality, that the kingdom itself is way, way above all of the things that we see as a generalization, as a sug. So the kingdoms, once more, exactly in the thought of Kabbalah, apply and relate to Binah, and the domain, which is more than that, the empire, is wisdom. Wisdom directly receives from life. So nonetheless, it says that, and if we're just discussing macro beings, so there's just one domain, which is the vegetable kingdom and the animal kingdom together. The reason that there are different domains is because it's cellular, molecular creatures, living creatures, which are not yet defined either as animals or as vegetables. All right, so then we have phylum, then would be chesed. And class, phylum, the ummah would be chesed. And class, which is the kvutza, would be gvura. And order would be tiferet. And then family or family tribe, and I'm not just saying the correspondence without explaining it too in depth, because as many other things, if a person has a sense which is based on a multitude of experience of doing the parallelism of Kabbalah and knowing what the sfirot mean, so he'll appreciate this much more than a person that doesn't have that background to it. So the family concept, the family tribe concept, that's Netzach and Hod. The genus and the species, which go together in the binomial expression of every different creature, that's obviously the Yehud of Yesod and Malchut. The genus, which is like the word gene, that's the foundation, that's the Yesod. And the Malchut itself is the species. And then once more, under that, you simply have Ishim, which come and go. Like at the very beginning of Ecclesiastes, of Kohelet, it says, Dor olech v'dor ba v'aras olam omedet. That generation comes and generation goes, but the earth, which is Malchut, which is the species, stands forever. That's actually an explicit verse in the Torah, that individuals come and go, and even generations come and go, live and die. But the earth principle, which is the species, remains because of fertile reproduction. Right. So this was an overview of the taxonomy, or what's called the biological scientific classification of biology, and how that very simply and perfectly can be seen to correspond one-to-one to the sfirot. That the more general principle obviously is the higher sfira, and the more particular principle is the lower sfira. And life then is Keter, and species is Malchut. Keter, which is, once more, and the species has in it the power of infinity, of Haaretz lo olam omedet. And Keter Elyon yu Keter Malchut. Actually, the two first words of the Torah, Breshit bara, in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth. Those first two words equal Keter Malchut. Na'ut sofan b'chnatam, which now means the manifestation of life and the creation of life by the Creator manifests itself at the very lowest level, which is the species level, life itself. Actually, just to give a simanim aseh, to make a summary based upon a gematria numerical beautiful phenomenon, if we take all of those words that we said will be the Hebrew version of our taxonomy, our biological taxonomy, which is Chayim and Malchut and Mamlacha and Ummah and Kvutza and Seder and Mishpacha and Sug and Min, so it will all come out to equal exactly 1,820. 70 times 26. 70 is soul. The secret, the mystery of Hashem's essential name, Havaya, which it itself is the number of times that name appears in the whole 5 books of Moses, exactly 1,820 times, which is the combined value of all of those terms for our biological classification of life on earth as God created. Okay, so this was an introductory class just to explain the levels and the concept that's explained here, the very first philosophic understanding that you have to have, which is the sug min concept.